So Gary, you've held in-house positions at major law firms. You have those rankings, the guide is published. What do you do next?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that there are law firms out there, and I've worked for more than one, who make the classic error of working really hard to get their rankings or maintain their rankings, rest on the laurels that, well, this will lead to work, or the partner's satisfaction that he can tell his peers that he's retained his ranking, and then they make absolutely no effort at all to use it in their general marketing. I think my first point would be, as a marketing director or marketing manager in a law firm, that there are essential boxes to tick. Once your rankings come out, and assuming they're good, let's start from that perspective, clearly you should be referencing that on your website. If you already have a section on your website that mentions your rankings, they shouldn't be 2 or 3 years out of date. Even if your ranking hasn't changed, you should be saying, in this year's directory, we have retained our ranking. It should be current. You should be completely focused on keeping your website up to date. Similarly with social media, get the word out there. On your Twitter feed, on your other platforms, on social media. Get the word out. If you have a PR agency or an in-house PR team, get the word out to your clients. And what I think is important, and law firms fall down on this, you may have a client in the banking sector that already knows that you're ranked tier 1. They'd also be interested to know that you have rankings in other tiers, because they might be interested in using you for employment law or another area which they don't currently use you for. So, take the opportunity to tell them. Now, whether that's through a press release or whether that's through a general communication or asking the partner who deals with them to let them know. But I think the starting point should be for all of the partners and all of the marketing team to get the message out. You've got this good news, make the most of it. Now, of course, being blunt and being honest, if there's not much change year on year, and there's nothing different or a step up or a new partner that's retained a ranking, or a lateral hire who's come in with a ranking, if there's no new story to tell, then it's a little more difficult. But I certainly think that even if it's the status quo, you should at least make the attempt to say, we've retained our ranking this year, we've maintained our performance. So all those basic building blocks, I think, is where you need to start, and then you can look at other opportunities from there.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think it's a mistake that, as you rightly said, we see firms making all the time. I think to a certain extent it's a planning issue. I think that firms put a lot of emphasis on planning the whole submission process, but that planning seems to stop at the point at which the submissions are filed, and they forget that actually 3, 4, 5 months later the directory will appear, and it should have been part of the plan from the beginning to then publicise the results in exactly the way that you have described. And do you see a difference in the way that the rankings can be used at a firm level and an individual lawyer level? For example, should an individual lawyer's ranking be part of their own business development plan? I mean, how do you see that working?
Well, certainly from the individual partner's point of view, it bears saying that clearly, if the partner himself or herself works to get the message out because they're proud of their ranking, that benefits the firm. But there's no denying it benefits them as well. And there's little doubt that partner rankings are sought. There is peer comparison, who's up, who's down, where I'm at. It gives partners a sense of self-worth, certainly partners that I know in their specialist area. And getting that message out is very important to them. There's nothing wrong with that. I encourage them to do that, but the firm will benefit as well. And at the end of the day, law firms are people businesses. Yes, you're buying the firm's brand, but ultimately you're buying the expertise of the people that you're using, and the partner and his ranking and his team's ranking is key to that. So I think the individual aspect of that is very important.
Yeah, I agree completely, and I think sometimes there is some reluctance among some partners. As you said, there are always those who are very, very keen to publicise their rankings. There is some reluctance amongst others, perhaps, to shout from the rooftops their own achievements. And we always try to advise our clients that really, given the effort put into the submission process, given the effort of drafting work highlights, following up with referees, once you have that ranking, it really is important to publicise it. I think the other key thing to mention is that just because you don't have a band 1 ranking as a firm or an individual lawyer doesn't mean that you shouldn't be publicising your ranking. If you are a band 2 firm, a band 3 firm, or a band 2 or band 3 lawyer, you have still achieved something incredible. There are hundreds, thousands of law firms and lawyers out there who are not getting into those rankings. So any position within a Chambers ranking, a Legal 500 ranking, IFLR ranking, still means a lot. You know, you are in the absolute upper echelons of the legal market. And perhaps when you're publicising those rankings, you don't need to say, we're very proud to be a band 3 firm, but you say we are very, very proud to be recognised as one of the leading law firms in this particular practice area, in this particular market. And I think at an individual lawyer level, again, just that recognition. It is a seal of approval from a recognised global brand. Chambers & Partners is a brand recognised around the world by Corporate Counsel and by other law firms. Legal 500, IFLR, these again are global brands, and linking your name as a law firm or as an individual lawyer to these brands is hugely powerful.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And yes, I mean, just to reiterate the point, it's very important to emphasise that having a ranking of any sort is more than half of the game. Where you're actually ranked, and we can have a dozen people here from the legal sector who would argue the point about whether, you know, what it takes to get into tier 1 or to be in tier 3, and whether, you know, where you're actually at reflects, you know, not that you're better or worse, but just where the rankings tend to fall. So being ranked is the absolute key to this. Needless to say, though, and you know, it's just worth making the point, going back to what I said earlier on, if you actually happen, you know, through the help of us, for example, to improve your ranking, because you've worked at it for a number of years, and for the first time in 10 years you've gone from tier 2 to tier 1, then you're going to shout that from the rooftops. So you work with what you've got. So for 90% of the time and 90% of firms, it'll be status quo, and status quo is still a good message. But if you've got a new good story to tell, then you should be shouting even louder.
Absolutely, and clients are going to want to work with those types of firms, those firms that are clearly on an upward trajectory.
Yeah. I think another aspect worth mentioning here is that we've been talking about individual partners, and clearly having them get the message out is in their own self-interest, and clearly it can help their career whether they stay at a firm or whether they move. But I think one of the aspects that's not covered, and some law firms don't think about this enough, is that HR departments now are very hot on using the rankings as a recruitment tool. If you have a good ranking, and the lawyers running those areas are you know, highly ranked as well, that's what attracts new talent. If you're trying to target an associate from another firm or even a lateral hire, those sort of things matter. Now, you'd assume that the target lawyer would be quite aware of where you are, and maybe they would, but not often. And what I've found is that in some firms, HR directors and HR departments are now as eager as the marketing department to say, here's a good news story that we can use the rankings as a recruitment tool.
Absolutely. I spoke to a UK law firm about this just a few months ago. They approached us to discuss their rankings with us. They were not particularly unhappy that their rankings had slipped over the years. They felt that in terms of revenue, it hadn't really affected the firm, but actually what they had found was they weren't able to attract the same level of talent that they'd been able to attract previously. So a few years ago, they were in band 2. They'd pretty much stopped submitting to the guide, slipped down to band 4, and they just couldn't attract the same quality of lawyers. And this, long term, in their view, will have an effect on the revenue, because they won't be able to provide the same sort of high quality of legal services that they've historically been able to provide.
Yeah, and this goes again to the point that, you know, when law firms are considering whether they need to, for the first time, go into the rankings or try to achieve a ranking or try and get a better ranking, and they're asking themselves as a firm, what's in it for us? They need to see the bigger picture here. You know, the reward for getting a ranking is wider than just winning a new client here or there. It supports the brand, it supports recruitment. Over time, you know, it supports the business in generally moving forward. And you could almost argue that actually winning a new client who happens to pick you up from the rankings and puts you on a shortlist is sort of the icing on the cake. You know, that's the added benefit, the added bonus. But all these other things come from it as well.